kind of surreal. I mean, it was like, he told me, and I kind of looked at him, and the first time I said, man, I can't believe it, he did this.
This is the father of Alec Krider, speaking after his son did something absolutely unspeakable on May 12, 2007. It was an act that left 3 people brutally butchered in their own homes, a massacre that left the small township of Mannheim, Pennsylvania, reeling in shock. What makes Krider's actions all the more baffling is that there's no discernible motive for them. Even now, nearly 2 decades later, investigators and analysts struggle to reconcile the quiet, withdrawn boy with the brutalization and murder of an innocent family. Today, we're going to dive into the case of Alec Krider, the butcher of Lancaster, the boy responsible for the massacre of the Haynes family. We'll attempt to reconstruct his statement of mind that fateful day in May and unpack the sequence of events that culminated in the bloody disaster that changed Mannheim Township forever. Alec Krider was born on February 4, 1991, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. His parents, Timothy Scott Krider and Angela Parsons Krider, separated when he was 10 years old, forcing him to split his time between the home of each parent. Krider also had a younger brother and an older sister, who he accompanied to whichever parent's home he was staying at for the week. Since Timothy and Angela lived just 1.5 miles away from each other, this constant moving between homes didn't affect Krider's school life all that much. He attended Mannheim Township High School, where he was known to be a bright student that mostly kept to himself. Based on available information, Krider was a straight-A student who was so dedicated to his education that he'd get genuinely upset if his teacher ever gave him a B. It's possible that he had an obsession with his grades and that he thought himself to be highly intellectual. Krider was opinionated, had a fascination with war and religion, and never shied away from an argument. Whenever he did debate with others, he could be bitter and extremely condescending to those that didn't support his views. Krider also had an eccentric streak, but it's fair to say that this was his good side, or in other words, it was the side of himself that he allowed the rest of the world to see. Behind closed doors, the intelligent, self-assured individual gave way to a person with an almost beast-like rage burning within him. To put it plainly, Krider had a violent streak, and once he got going, there was nothing that anyone could do to calm him down. His father tried to get him to behave, but nothing he did had much of an effect. On one occasion, Timothy tried to tell Krider to go to bed, only for Krider to say no. Timothy then threatened to take Krider's toys away if he didn't listen, to which Krider responded that he didn't care. Timothy then took the toys away. Krider had no reaction whatsoever, and Timothy ended up returning the toys himself a few days later. It's clear that Krider was a strong-willed boy who never did anything he didn't want to. When combined with the sheer, red-hot rage that was bubbling inside him, this created a violent and potentially lethal mixture. One of the first signs that Krider may be a danger to society happened in his own home when he started strangling his little brother out of the blue. The cause of this altercation is unknown, but what we know for sure is that Krider nearly killed his brother that day. It was just the first indication that he had a certain kind of bloodlust in him, one that would lead him inevitably and inexorably to murder. The Haynes were the sort of family you'd see in commercials, smiling around a kitchen table, holding hands as they poured cereal and milk into their bowls for breakfast. In most cases, this would suggest a dark undercurrent that no one had been able to spot yet. In this case, the shiny exterior turned out to be completely legitimate. The Haynes family truly was the happy all-American family everyone thought them to be. Tom Haynes, the family patriarch, was born and raised in Mannheim Township. After graduating from high school in 1974, the same high school Krider would later attend, he attended Slippery Rock University and spent the next 20 years working at Motion Industries as a branch manager and industrial supply salesman. His friends described him as a gentle, soft-spoken man with a lifelong passion for track and field. He often trained to run in marathons, and it's not a stretch to imagine him helping his fellow runners get to the finish line. Lisa Haynes, on the other hand, was not so outgoing. She was the sort of person that liked walks in nature and watching old movies, and she had a deep love for animals of all kinds. She was born in Lancaster County as well, and had spent the past 9 years working as nursery school teacher at Lancaster Church of the Brethren Preschool. Her gentle personality made her the perfect teacher for little kids, and she showed that same love to her own children as well. Her oldest, Maggie, was a lot like Tom in that she loved to run every chance she got. However, she also inherited a love for animals from her mother, and in 2007, she was studying animal behavior at Bucknell University. She was a normal college student by all accounts, albeit one that preferred to hit the library rather than the nearest party, and she preferred hanging out with her friends to dating. And then there was Kevin, the youngest member of the Haynes family, and perhaps the most innocent of them all. A literal Boy Scout, Kevin was the dictionary definition of a good kid. He wrote for the school paper, participated in quizzes, and had a passion for history that helped him become friends with a rather quiet kid at school named Alec. Krider was one of just 2 people that Kevin called his friend. They debated passionately about religion and history, and had been the best of friends since the 4th grade. One could see them growing up together and maintaining a brotherly relationship for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, this just wasn't meant to be. The dark passenger that Krider carried wasn't going to allow him to maintain any kind of healthy relationship. His violent side was scratching to get out and leave its mark on the world. And on the 12th of May, that's exactly what happened. But before we get into that, we must discuss a pivotal moment in Krider's life, one that involved his father. Krider's dad wanted to bond with his son however he could. He found it difficult, of course, due to Krider's antisocial tendencies. According to psychologists and other experts, the boy also showed signs of narcissism, sociopathy, and a general lack of empathy. Krider also had an impulsive streak. No one could predict what he might do next, and he had a tendency to manipulate people to do his bidding as well. But apart from that, Krider also felt a deep sense of isolation from the world. He felt empty and unhappy, and had difficulty connecting to anyone other than Kevin, who was his only friend in the world. The most minor of annoyances would send Krider into an intense rage, such as the sound of someone chewing or breathing heavily. It was perhaps for these reasons that Krider's father decided to give him a gift, likely hoping that it would make his son feel like he was loved. The exact date and time is unknown, but at some point, Krider accompanied Tim to his grandfather's house, where his dad started sifting through old belongings. During this trip down memory lane, he uncovered a knife that had been passed down from generation to generation. Tim's dad had given it to him, and in that moment, Tim decided to give it to his own son. It's possible that Tim thought this would make his son feel less alone. But the truth is, he'd just handed a lethal weapon to a child that was known to fly into a vicious rage at the drop of a hat. Some say he should have exercised better judgment. Others say that there was no way for him to know what was about to occur. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. At some point in 2007, Krider started speaking to a girl named Caroline. She was possibly the first girl he'd ever shown an interest in, and the 2 of them quickly became close. They spoke on the phone as often as they could, and Krider started telling her about his deep-seated sense of loneliness. He talked to her about his desire to self-harm and his inability to connect with others. Caroline was the only person he felt he could talk to other than Kevin, and she noticed a change in his behavior in early May. Krider's mother, Angela, had also noticed him being a bit more withdrawn than usual. He just wasn't the boy she knew him to be. On the 5th of May, Krider wrote a poem about his deep sense of loneliness. He seemed to want a way out. Most people would have assumed that he was suicidal, but the reality was, Krider was preparing to commit an act of homicide, and he'd already picked out his targets. On May 10th, 2007, Maggie came home from summer break. She arrived home at around 7 p.m., at which time Kevin was at school with his dad to talk about an upcoming field trip to Germany. Maggie's mom, Lisa, was there to greet her, and they ate dinner together as they waited for Kevin and Tom to return. When they came back home, the family talked and watched TV together. It was a nice bit of family bonding time, something that they'd sorely been missing while Maggie was away at college. Tom and Lisa went to bed at around 9 p.m., and Maggie headed to her room to watch TV shows on her laptop and chat with her friends. The next morning, Maggie got up and started unpacking her belongings. While Tom and Lisa were at work and Kevin was at school, Maggie took tests for a temp agency that she planned to work at for the summer. That evening, Lisa returned and wrote thank you letters for all of her students. Tom came back and started preparing spaghetti for dinner. As the family came together to eat, Kevin talked excitedly about his upcoming trip to Germany, and Maggie told her parents about how college was going for her. After having dinner, the family settled down to watch a romantic comedy film. Kevin wasn't all that interested, so he went to bed at around 8 p.m. Lisa went to bed after the movie ended, but Maggie and Tom stayed up for some quality father-daughter time. They watched a sports game together before finally retiring for the night. At around midnight, Maggie got up to go to the bathroom. All the lights in the house were off. Everyone was sleeping. All was well. About an hour later, Maggie was woken up again, this time to the sound of screaming and the unmistakable smell of blood. Sometime before midnight, Krider put on a dark trench coat, black gloves, and a dark-colored baseball cap with duct tape over the logo. He picked up a flashlight and the hunting knife his father had given him and headed out. When he got to the Haynes residence, he found that the front door was unlocked. He entered, moving quietly so as to not awaken his prey. Krider was in full hunter mode now, and he wasn't going to let anything get in the way. His main target was Kevin, so he headed to his room. While his best friend slept, he slid the hunting knife into him repeatedly, causing him to scream. Kevin tried to make a run for it, but Krider successfully killed him by the time he got to the hallway. He then entered Tom and Lisa's room and started stabbing. The sheer energy required to stab someone so many times was nothing for Krider in his fit of rage. By the time he was done, Tom was dead and Lisa was screaming in pain, losing massive amounts of blood as Krider left the room. It was these screams that woke Maggie up. She rushed to her parents' bedroom and saw her father dead, while her mother was barely clinging to life. Lisa could barely speak, but she managed to tell Maggie to run and get help. Maggie listened, rushing out and banging on the door of her neighbor's home. By this point, Krider had already done what he'd set out to do. He had no idea Maggie was home early from college, so he exited through a sliding glass door in the back, leaving bloody fingerprints along the way. He lost his cap and flashlight during his escape and got home, where he lay awake, contemplating what he'd just done. When Angela found Krider the next day, he told her he had an upset stomach and that he wanted to stay in bed. She eventually read in the newspaper that the Haynes had been killed, and when she told Krider, he reacted like anyone else would, with shock and sadness. Krider's mood seemed to swing from angry to overjoyed. Some students reported that he acted more confident at school, but he was also more prone to snapping at others. Oddly enough, he apologized after doing so, which was even more unusual for him. Krider attended the memorial service for the Haynes family and seemed to act perfectly normally there as well. Maggie was reportedly hysterical when she found out about the death of her entire family, so perhaps everyone was focusing so much on her that they had no idea about the killer in their midst. And then, on June 6th, Krider called Caroline. He seemed like he was in a state of extreme mental distress, telling Caroline that he wanted to kill himself and that he'd borrowed a gun from a friend to do it. He even loaded the gun loudly on the call, frightening Caroline and prompting her to alert her aunt, who called the police. The police then informed Angela and sent a unit to accompany her to the residence. While police and Krider's mother headed towards him, Krider talked about wanting to harm himself, his family, and even Caroline. He said that the only thing that made him feel anything was killing. Angela and the police finally arrived. All Krider could say was, "You don't know what I've done." Considering his mental state, the best possible option was to have him involuntarily admitted to a psychiatric ward. Krider was extremely unhappy in the facility. He wrote in his journal about wanting to leave and talk to Caroline, but he didn't realize that his outburst had made her want to keep her distance. When Angela and Timothy came and told him that she just wanted to be friends, Krider reportedly responded with another angry outburst. About a week after he was admitted, Krider confessed to this therapist about what he'd done. On June 14th, after taking advice from the therapist, he told his father what he'd done.
Yeah, your world kind of stops for a moment. You're like, what do you do with that when you hear that as a parent?
It took Tim 2 days to finally work up the courage to go to the police. But as soon as he did, investigators headed to Krider's room to investigate. In his drawer, they found a note with "Alexander was born May 12th at 3:30, 2007 scrawled on it, suggesting that he felt he'd been born again after killing his best friend and their family. They also found the murder weapon and all the other evidence they needed. Krider was charged with 3 counts of murder in the first degree. He pleaded guilty to all of them and was sentenced to consecutive life sentences. Krider's time in jail was mixed, to say the least. He was whiny and desperate at first, seemingly convinced that he'd only get a sentence of a few years, after which he'd go to an Ivy League college.
Promise this is the last question. What's his typical day like?
Right now, he has no typical day. When I say typical day, he's still in the quarantine process. He's still being interviewed. He's still being spoken with. Intake evaluations will be done, his medical history, that type of thing. So it's almost, I guess you'd say it's like when somebody goes into service, all the stuff that is undoctrinated, he'll be provided now. And once that's all done, his typical day is what he'll make of it. If he wants to be involved in education, they'll be coming down with him, working with him. If he wants to have counseling, he'll be provided whatever counseling he wants, whether that's spiritual, regular counseling, etc.
He also befriended a fellow inmate named George, to whom he confessed the crimes. George would later report that Krider was laughing and smiling while talking about the crimes, saying that he felt joy while killing his best friend. Following a Supreme Court ruling in 2012, minors sentenced to life in prison were now allowed a resentencing hearing. Krider was up for one of these hearings, but on January 20th, 2017, he killed himself via hanging in his cell. The case of Alec Krider is one that investigators and analysts still struggle to wrap their heads around. With the perpetrator now dead, chances are that his true motives will remain a mystery forever. So what do you think of this case? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.